7 o'clock. I will officially call this meeting of the Bylaw Study Committee to order. There are 3 of us in the room currently. None of our committee members are on Zoom, although Skip said he would expect to be joining us by Zoom at some point. But for now, we are it. And the main purpose of this meeting, and the first item on our agenda, is the public outreach meeting that we had planned for the purpose of inviting the public to review, comment on, and make suggestions on the bylaw updates that we have made to date. We have no members of the public here in the meeting room. We currently have no Zoom attendees. For the benefit of anybody who views this meeting and wants to hear something about it, I will keep this pretty informal and just kind of briefly go over essentially the highlights of what the committee has done to date for proposing revisions to the Town of Grafton general bylaws. Much of the work that we have done has been essentially minor in nature, not so much substantive as in going through and reviewing the bylaws from beginning to end with an eye towards tweaking, cleaning up a lot of things, just in no particular order. What we have done, and you'll see this reflected in most of the proposed bylaw article updates that we have currently published on the website and that we have yet to publish. We've reworded things for clarity whenever we saw wording that seemed to be unclear or confusing. And I will pause because our member Skip Courier appears to be in the process of connecting to Zoom. Skip, can you hear us? I thought I heard Skip for just a moment there. But I'm not seeing Skip's video. And showing the muted. So, yeah. And it's lost. Wait just a moment longer to see if Skip can get himself connected.
I see video on, but it's black and no audio. Can you hear us, Tim?
Now I can.
Video's black.
So how many people are on? Anyone?
Well, we have the three of us in the meeting room here, you on Zoom. We know Andy's at another meeting tonight. We have nobody in the room and we have no Zoom attendees. So our public outreach is not in real time reaching out to any public that we can see. However, I was just beginning to go through a brief informal summary of what we have done to date and plan to do with the bylaw revisions for the purpose of informing any member of the public who views this meeting after it's published on the YouTube. So I've just begun with that. So let me repeat basically by going through a lot of what we've done, a lot of what you will see in the bylaw revisions that we have published and will publish are things that are kind of not non-substantive, but we've gone through really from the beginning, and we've reworded for clarity various places where the language seemed to be confusing or unclear. We've revised throughout the bylaws to avoid using gender-specific terminology in various ways, depending on context, avoiding he, him, her, she, using the genderless pronouns, there, them, theirs, or alternative phrasing that avoids gendered pronouns in language. We have revised provisions for the posting of notices for hearings and other matters for consistency of language and to make sure that posting of notices includes posting on the town website. We've corrected any number of typographical and spelling errors. We've corrected grammar where we've noticed issues with grammar. We've updated section, subsection, and paragraph numbering for consistency and clarity. We've updated and are planning to update dollar amounts of fines where they seem to be out of date. We've looked to eliminate redundancies, avoid saying the same thing in two different places. We've revised or eliminated outdated provisions of the bylaws. We're revising the bylaws for consistency with state law, consistency with the town charter, consistency within the bylaws, and consistency with current practices. And finally, among the list of just the general things we've done is we've revised or added provisions in response to Attorney General approval letters from past bylaw revisions, where occasionally the Attorney General has some suggestions for things that we ought to add or change. So we've incorporated those into our proposed bylaw revisions. In terms of a few highlights that I'd like to call the public's attention to, some more substantive changes, and there's a lot more. I'm not going to attempt to go through everything, but a few highlights at least that I thought were worth mentioning are in Article 1, which is the general provisions of the bylaws. We've updated the appointment list in Section 9 of Article 1 to eliminate items that are outdated, redundant, or otherwise do not need to be included on the list, recognizing that this appointment list in the bylaw is not intended to be and really cannot be a complete list of all appointments. Various appointments are spelled out in various other places, and they don't need to be repeated here. Article 15, currently known as dogs running at large, has received a fairly substantial update to conform with current animal control requirements and practices. Article 18, house numbering, has updated requirements for placement of house numbers to ensure adequate visibility. Articles 22 and 29, use of Silver Lake and Lake Ripple respectively, have been combined into a single article for the use of both lakes because the two were virtually identical. Article 24, scenic roads, we have clarified permit procedures, added enforcement procedures. Article 28, fire department, we've added provisions reflecting the adoption of the strong chief statute, and we've added lockbox requirements requested by the fire chief to ensure fire department access to commercial and multifamily structures. And Article 33, the shade tree bylaw, We've changed the Public Shade Tree Management Advisory Board from a required board to an optional board, since that board had existed for a number of years, but was abandoned at some point about 10 years ago. Possibly someone may want to bring it back, so we've left it in, but as an optional. Those are just a few things that I thought were worth calling out specifically. There are all sorts of other changes that will be made. Anyone who is interested in the details is encouraged to consult the Bylaw Study Committee's webpage on the town website, where every proposed bylaw article is published there with all the revisions. Just to note that there are a few bylaw articles that we have yet to publish proposed revisions for. So that's basically, in very brief, a summary of what we've done to date. We will expand on this and fill it out in a lot more detail as we get close to the town meeting in October, where these bylaw revisions will be voted. We will put together a complete package of information about the updates themselves, and a more detailed summary of what we've done. So, having said that, unless there's something else that any one of you guys wants to sort of include in this is mainly for the benefit of anybody who realizes they missed this meeting or was unable to make it and would like to review the video afterwards. And again, we'll be going over all this in a lot more detail come fall.
I think that covered pretty well.
That takes care of the first agenda item. Noting no members of the public in the room or on Zoom, we don't have any feedback to take in real time here, but as always, the committee welcomes public feedback basically right up to the date we have to vote on this at town meeting. But hopefully we'll have everything pretty well together by September or so. With that, I can move on to the next agenda item, which is discussion of bylaw article revisions remaining to be completed. Under that, the first thing I want to bring up is really sort of a follow-up on some discussion we had at the previous meeting regarding the position of treasurer/collector. There was some question about when exactly did that happen? And I did a little bit of digging and found out that the treasurer-collector position was actually created when we adopted the charter. In May of 1987, it was one of the transitional provisions that merged the treasurer and collector into a single office. What's interesting about that is that happened, that was adopted by vote at the ballot of the annual election in May of '87. In August of that year, the legislature amended that provision, and that came about through the governor's office. And a little known way of getting special legislation is by the direct request from the governor's office. We're familiar with town meeting voting to request the legislature to do special legislation. It turns out you can also do that by working directly with the governor's office. So Governor Dukakis requested the legislature to pass special legislation modifying our charter 3 months after we voted the charter in. Reason for that was the legislation described it as correcting a technical error having to do with the date on which the treasurer collector position takes effect. The original charter language had it taking effect on July 1st of 1988. The special legislation had it taking effect July 1st, 1987. There was the original charter also had provisions for what happens if either the treasurer or the collector go away before the new position is created. That was all eliminated. So I had mentioned, I remembered seeing something about special legislation about this, and that's what it was. It was a technical correction to the brand new charter. That's the history of the treasurer collector position.
That will help. Thank you.
Yes. Hopefully that clears it up. And on other bylaw article revisions that have been circulated for our review, Article 40. Got a new draft of Article 40, Greg?
Yeah, basically, we talked about this at a previous meeting, reducing the amount of data in the table because there are some things in there that did not need to be in there. We said the yearly amounts did not need to be there, and also the dates. So I updated that and added a separate column with the name of the fund and ran all of that by Mary Loria, and she was fine with that. She made a couple suggestions on minor changes to the fund names. So those are included in this draft.
And so as far as we know, that one's ready to be published as an update to our previous draft. And as far as we know now, that's going to be satisfactory to all the appropriate parties.
Yes.
The hash mark, done, success.
So now the only changes in that article are the removal of that one section about school bus drivers in section 2, removal of 3 list entries of things that are listed in the table, which we don't have, and then a complete replacement of the table, mostly just adding the fund name and clarifying a couple places where revenue source or allowed expenses weren't quite accurate.
So from here on out, there are 2 things that can happen. One is every year, town meeting will vote the dollar amounts for that fiscal year.
Yeah.
And that doesn't need to reflect, and that does not get reflected in the bylaw anymore. So that's cleared up.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, if a fund is added or removed, that's when we update the table in the bylaw.
Correct.
We're good. We're good with publishing that as an update.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what I think we all expected to.
Yeah.
That's what we're all waiting for. Good work. All right, the next one I have on my list, and again, in no particular order, Article 26. Brian, you had something on that.
Yeah, so I heard back from treasurer collector and actually I reached out to William as well to see if he had done any other digging that we weren't already privy to when the certificate of good standing policy revision was done earlier this year with the select board. Both of their primary feedback was that, most, if not all of what had been the first section A, could be removed. The list that's referenced there is no longer in use and was deemed kind of outdated and replaced by the requirement for certificates of good standing to be issued in order to issue any of the licenses and permits that pertain to that policy. So made a few other kind of conforming changes to reference that policy and or elements of things that are in the select board's purview throughout. And then in the last section, section 5, which details the licenses and permits that the bylaw should not apply to. It was kind of a messy list to begin with, referencing sections of Mass General Law that pertain to each of these other licenses, which I didn't feel were incredibly necessary to, a simple list of permits and licenses that the bylaw wouldn't pertain to. So I've stricken those references, but obviously that's up for debate if anybody feels differently there.
Yeah, I'd say I'm comfortable with what you proposed there. I think to a degree, what we're doing with this update is punting some of the details to the select board.
Yeah, I think in the completely striking what had been the initial first section of the bylaw and replacing that basically with language saying that the select board shall implement and execute upon a policy to take care of these details. Definitely gives them.
Yeah, so this is enough to authorize and require the select board to do that detailed work without having to include all the details in the bylaw.
Right.
Which is, generally, I think that's a good idea for the bylaw to be no more detailed than it really has to be.
I sent this back to William and the treasurer collector, to see if they had any incremental feedback. I heard back from William today and he was fine with these changes.
I do have one issue, second sentence of section 2. The completed certificate of good standing application shall be prima facie evidence for denial, revocation, or suspension. This has kind of changed the meaning of this. So this now says that if you have a certificate of good standing, that's evidence for denial, where previously it was being on the list of people who are not in good standing is evidence for denial. So that is going to have to be reworked a little bit.
Yeah, so the certificate, so when you're applying for a license or permit, you're required to, go through this certificate of good standing application. It's possible to go through that application and get a negative response.
Mm-hmm.
So a response from the treasurer collector saying that you do have outstanding amounts owed to the town. And so that's kind of what my thought process was there, that you could have for the certificate of good standing application to be evidence for denial. Theoretically, that would be a situation where you had that sort of negative response on that application. It's probably
So that's about denial of a applied for permit. This section is about revoking or suspending permits that have already been applied. So if someone has a permit and then appears on the list of delinquent, then that permit can be suspended.
Yeah.
So that's why it's going to need a little bit of work there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see where that sort of.
Yeah, so previously, the tax collector would issue a list to anybody who issues permits, and then they would check that against open permits and potentially suspend them. And then we've kind of lost that ability here.
Right, what we've done here is somewhat inverted the sense of it.
Yeah.
That the original sense was section 2, yeah. The original sense was if you're on that list, that means you're delinquent.
Yeah.
And if you're on that list, that's evidence for denial.
Yeah. Or
So what we changed the sense of this a little bit to be.
I don't think we lose anything if we strike that entire sentence.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. And we talked about the licensing authority may deny, revoke, or suspend any license or permit if the applicant's not in compliance with the policy. This is basically saying the same thing again.
Yeah, right. So that second sentence is essentially saying that your appearance on that list means you're not in compliance.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. The second sentence doesn't add it.
Right.
It only adds confusion the way it's read. Yeah. And yeah, if we simply delete that sentence, is anything lost? And so.
Only that previously that if your name is on the list, that is enough evidence for the party to start the denial, revocation, or suspension process. And I don't know if that's actually necessary, but that might be something to bring back to the town administrator.
Yeah, I mean, I think
the thoughts on that are.
To me, yeah, the first sentence requires compliance with the good standing policy. And then I think anything that we would have
I think trying to translate that second sentence into the context of the select board policy what it's trying to say is evidence that you are not in compliance with that select board policy is sufficient to cause sufficient for denial. So
Sure.
if anything's missing at this point, it's the evidence of you not being in compliance. I don't know what the best way is. Offhand, I'd have to think about the best way to express that here is, so the first sentence is a requirement that if you are not in compliance with the certificate of good standing policy, the licensing authority may deny, revoke, or suspend your license. Then the question becomes, what is the evidence that you are not in compliance? Which is then that's the sense of that second sentence is evidence that you are not in compliance is evidence for denial.
I would almost prefer to be silent on it, because if we're silent on it, yeah, you can imply, so not being in compliance could either be a negative application, for saying that you have something outstanding, or not having completed the application at all.
So the select board policy then would be the place to spell out what it means to be not in compliance. Sure. Not in compliance.
And it probably already does in requiring the application and requiring that it be clean, not showing amounts in.
And so from the perspective of the bylaw requires you to, says that if you don't comply with the select board policy, you can be denied the license. The select board policy then can spell out what it means to be not in compliance.
Yeah, the select board policy only talks about applications for making a request. It does not have anything to do currently with revoking or suspending existing license or permits.
Yeah, so that may mean that we need to say something in the bylaw, or it may mean that the bylaw has to require the select board policy to spell out the results. It's not enough for you to apply for that. You have to. This may end up being a matter to be the bylaw has to stand on its own.
Yeah.
But the bylaw can delegate to the select board a lot of the details. And so we need to make sure that the bylaw makes that kind of essentially that, for lack of a better term, called a round trip.
Yeah.
You have to comply with the policy, and you have to have a certificate of good standing in order to get your license.
Yeah. And you have to maintain good standing throughout the length of it.
And the current bylaw spells that all out by defining the list.
Yeah.
And then your appearance on that list is, you're on that list because you're not up to date with your.
Yeah, and that's an annual thing. So it may be as simple as we say that the tax collector is responsible for informing other departments of anyone who has become delinquent for a longer than a 12-month period. Let that be a floating thing at the time that it happens, rather than just once a year.
I think, Dave, what you were saying before is this has to stand on its own. We shouldn't even be referencing the select board's policies or procedures, because that would almost give them the ability to change bylaws at their whim.
Yeah. I'm thinking that, the bylaw can delegate to the select board some of the details of the policy, but the bylaw, in order for this bylaw to work, bylaw has to say enough about what that select board policy does so that the policy is actually used for the purpose of denying licenses
And revoking suspending.
and revoking, yeah. And so while the select board policy may go into more detail about how that all works,
Yeah,
it connects, it has to, the bylaw has to place certain requirements on that select board policy so that the policy it can be used for the purposes the bylaw wants it to be used for. So I don't want to, I mean, it'd be nice to avoid overlap. And I don't mind delegating to the select board things that, details that don't really need to be in the bylaw. But we still need to make the connection.
yeah. So this needs to empower the policy.
Yes, and it needs to define at some level, it needs to define what that policy does. Basically, the result of the policy has to be a go, no-go indication.
Really, the big piece that's missing, and it's been missing all along, is what would trigger a revocation or suspension. So it's not
The yearly
clear.
list.
Well,
Section
yeah,
one, the annual list.
and so I could certainly, Chris certainly be overstating, but I seriously doubt when, maybe it happened, but when that list used to be circulated, if all of the town departments took it, went through the list of all issued and outstanding permits and licenses to see if anybody that wasn't previously on those lists was then all of a sudden on those lists. So I think
Hopefully it's a short list.
yeah. So, maybe the question is, do we even leave in the provisions related to revoking and suspending? Because if we're really only concerned about upfront either granting or denying, then I think the select board policy probably goes as far as it needs to, by requiring a certificate of good standing before a permit is issued. I think where we have more gaps is when it comes to, all right, so what could trigger something being revoked or suspended in an interim. The only place where the select board policy touches on that a little bit is in talking about vendors that provide goods or services to town departments must have a certificate on file that needs to be updated on a semi-annual basis. So it's a rolling thing. You need a new certificate every 6 months. But outside of that, it's really just kind of, we need the certificate when you apply. And once you apply, that's kind of where that policy stops.
I would not want to take away the ability for the town to revoke or suspend license or permits, because that could be on some of these permits can last a long time. I'm thinking like zoning permits and building permits.
Permits that are renewed periodically, and at every renewal you would check.
Yeah.
So some of the mechanics, we may not quite sure how they work, but in the sense that the bylaw has been there for quite a long time, to whatever extent the town has actually used this bylaw, probably best not to change it too much. Going back a little bit to the question of how much is delegated to the select board policy. I'm kind of thinking of it as an interface specification in software. You say what goes in, you say what you expect to come out. And so we have to kind of, if we're going to delegate some of this to select board policy, I think I was kind of saying this before, that we need to say enough about what has to come out of that policy to make this bylaw work. It's more than just how do you fill out an application.
Yeah.
So did anyone watch while they debated this or talked about it? Or, I think I kind of talked about this at the last meeting, and Andy said it just kind of came up as a little bit of discussion time, if my memory actually serves me correctly, that there wasn't a whole lot of discussion about it.
Yeah, this was one in their series of just kind of scrubbing all old select board policies. So it was really just kind of touched up for formatting and format. They didn't really there certainly wasn't any debate in the meeting about the merits or kind of diving into, and I don't believe from exchanging some emails with William, it didn't seem like there was really any substantial changes from the prior policy. It was really just kind of putting it in the current format. So,
And so almost getting a sense, dovetailing with what Dave's saying is, if the end game is we want to be able to suspend somebody's license if they're not current on their taxes, then the select board's policy, it depends on how far reaching the select board wants to be. As in, is it just the things that are within their purview? I would imagine that there are licenses and permits that are due to people under state law that may not be revocable or non-issuable, even if they're late on their taxes. And it looked like there was a bunch of like, okay, well, you can appeal to the tax collector. The tax collector can listen in on this hearing kind of thing. Almost seemed to me like this is kind of making a bit of creating something that it's going to make life harder. I
wonder, this bylaw was adopted by the town at the May town meeting in 1987.
Or last amended anyways.
That's when it was originally adopted.
Like the original?
Yes,
Okay.
I went back looking up with all the information I have available. I have a library of town reports going back to 1987. And the May 87 town meeting was where this bylaw was actually created. And I don't know if there's any record of why someone thought it was a good idea. Just for this discussion, you know, the more you think about it, the more wrinkles you find. And it occurs to me to wonder if there are other towns that have done something similar that we might use as points of comparison, see if we can make this thing work better and resolve some of the questions that we have. The select board has a policy. Who knows how old that policy is, whether anybody's used it.
Dave, I'll add that to my Article 4 stuff for the next meeting. Look, you know, as I look at other towns' bylaws, kind of see if there's anything in there about this.
Yeah, if I found it, this will come up in a little while after making our discussion of it, but I found a number of bylaws that we have, and I've looked at maybe 2 or 3 dozen different town bylaws for various reasons. And there's some things that we have in our bylaws that no other town has. Not necessarily good or bad, it's just a point of information. We may have good reasons for it, but it seems like it would be useful for us to get more information and think through a greater level of detail how this can work. And
so, for instance, one of the licenses that a Board of Health would issue is a milk dealer's license. Well, the town can't put its own rules and regulations in there about somebody being current with their business taxes to issue a license.
now,
You know,
that's a good point, that this can only apply to licenses issued by a town board, and then only to licenses for which the town board might have the discretion to deny the license for this reason. Yeah, and some of the licenses issued by the select board, as an example, you know, the rules for those licenses are all dictated by the state, and we may not have the option to impose this sort of a condition on the issuance of that license. Other licenses, we may have that option, so we need to maybe get some clarity on that as well. And yeah, it sounds to me like the select board policy as it stands doesn't integrate really well with this bylaw. And here we thought it just looked simple. And even
No, I mean, I would disagree if we're talking about issuing a license or permit. So I think the question about which permits it can apply to, I think is a valid one, and you know, there's some homework to do there. But I think when it comes to issuing a license or a permit, especially, you know, any of the 7 that the select board good standing policy application specifically calls out, those are explicit. If you're late on your taxes and you apply for an electric permit, you're not going to get it. I think there are questions about, you know, so if you've got a longer duration license or permit, you know, similar to what the select board policy calls out for vendors or people doing business with the town that need a new certificate of good standing every 6 months, should we require that as well? And if you become delinquent in your taxes, while you have an outstanding license or permit, you know, then that becomes subject to possibly being revoked. But I think the two align fairly well if we're focused on at issuance. I think the bylaw needs to address more than at issuance, but I think at least at that point, I think the two are fairly well aligned.
Yeah. It may be worth adding something at the end of section 5, or saying something like, or any other license or permit for which the state law prohibits this kind of thing.
Yeah. I wonder if it'd be, if this is good enough for us to publish as a whole, you know, everything we publish is subject to revision anyway.
Yeah.
But if this is kind of, you know, close enough to be at least worth public review and comment, subject to further thinking about it. You know, I still want to make sure that it circles through the select board policy in such a way that the results of the select board policy feed back into this bylaw.
Yeah.
This might even,
That one sentence just kind of, the prima facie one kind of stands out as, that might be enough that we should make one more pass through select board, town administrator, legal, that kind of thing before.
yeah,
A
simple question to council should be, you know, will these two actually work together or not?
Yeah, I forget how much we want to try to manage our pings to town council. I'd be interested in definitely having them review section 5 and seeing, you know, if we can get away with the even more general, like unless prohibited elsewhere, or something along those lines. Because yeah, I was leery, even just making the edits that we did, with once you get into listing things that are excluded, you miss one exclusion and it throws the whole thing out.
Yeah, ultimately, it might turn out to be appropriate to delegate the exclusions to the select board policy. But for now, I'd say that's what we had in the bylaw. Leave it, you know, I think removing the references to mass general laws is fine, because assuming that the name of the license is understood, be pretty clear. And this may get back to, you know, the sentence that Greg originally started this discussion with, where that just, you know, it's unclear, sufficiently unclear that, you know, the sense of that is that if you are found to be
Used to be if you were on the list.
If you do not have a good if you do not have that certificate of good standing, then you can be denied the license. And if nothing else, if that sentence is revised to basically say that, if you don't have that certificate of good standing, that's evidence for denial and revocation.
Or would it be good? So basically saying the inverse of the first sentence, non-compliance with the select board certificate of good standing policy shall be prima facie evidence.
So we could make that one sentence work by saying, lack of a completed certificate of good standing shall be prima facie evidence for denial of said license or permit to any party. And then we can deal with revocation and suspension in a separate sentence or something.
Yeah, I didn't even know this. I mean, yeah, there are logistics questions about revocation and suspension, but for the purpose of this bylaw, lack of a certificate of good standing or lack of compliance or lack of compliance with the select board policy shall be prima facie evidence.
Yeah.
That there may be some other details to be thought about, but at least at this level, first sentence says you must, if you're not in compliance, you can be denied, revoked, or suspended.
And I can add to the blurb up above that we're still looking into provisions around revocation suspension in section 2.
And then, so the prima facie evidence for denial of revocation suspension is the lack of evidence of compliance.
Yeah.
If you simply say non-compliance is evidence, that's completely redundant with the first sentence.
Yeah.
But the point of the second sentence was, well, what, in the old way of things, the old scheme of things, if you're on that list, that's evidence of non-compliance.
Yeah.
And so we've eliminated the list as such. So we need to say, what is the evidence? And the evidence is evidence of lack of compliance. It almost says the same thing in the sentence. But
So,
yeah,
basically, evidence of lack of compliance with the policy shall be prima facie evidence for denial, revocation, or suspension.
Yeah, and I'm just adding a bullet to the top saying further consideration of provisions relating to revocation and suspension ongoing.
Yeah, and that's something that the question of the procedures for revocation, suspension, that may be something that we just don't want to get into in the bylaw.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to stay away from that. This is starting to sound like the Marx Brothers. The party of the first part, the party of the second part.
Yeah, I think the intent with this revision of the bylaw is to connect it to that select board certificate of good standing policy.
Yeah.
And some of the mechanics of that, maybe ultimately the bylaw needs to say something more. Maybe ultimately the select board policy needs to go a little bit deeper, not just how to fill out application, but what are the procedures to be followed for implementing the denial, revocation, suspension.
Yeah, I think the two this is an annual list of people that at that time were not in compliance, and boards use that for other stuff. And then the select board policy is, okay, well, that may not be enough because you might have come out of compliance since that list was published. So you need to verify your compliance at the time of application. So I think they do fill slightly different spaces as currently, but I think it'd be good to bring them back together again.
Around further consultation, further thought, and
I think we're probably done with this one.
I think for now, I think we've got a direction here.
Do you want me to pull together some questions for council and forward those through you, or are you going to be going straight to Evan? Or?
We're getting close to the time when we're going to be, this is on my list of things to discuss later tonight. But we're getting close to the time when we're going to want council to review everything that we've produced here. And this may be one particular thing to call to council attention in the review of this article. But at this point, I don't think I'm getting the sense that we need some immediate answers from council on this. Because what we're really trying to do here is tie this in with that select board policy And there may be some details that still need to be worked, but for now, what we've got as a proposal here seems to work.
Yeah, just pass on the revision and the list of concerns to Evan and let him figure out where to go from there.
Yep. All right, next thing on my list is Article 4, specifically on appointments and reorganizations, that the language that Greg sent around to us earlier this week. Interestingly enough, after we had this informal discussion last week,
Yeah.
whenever it was, I was thinking a little bit more about that, jotted down some notes. And your proposed revisions capture everything I was thinking of in more detail.
So basically, we were looking at this particular section, and it was unclear whether this was intended to be an annual event or this is specifically about organization of new committees. So David and I both looked at that and thought, this is probably only about new committee organization, and some other people that looked at it thought differently. So I thought, okay, we should clarify. These are the procedures for creating a new committee, getting it established, and appointing new people to the committee. And then separately, there is nothing else in the bylaws or charter that covers required reorganization of boards or committees. So that is added as a separate section from the initial organization, talking about how and when boards have to reorganize and how they may choose to reorganize after that point for some other reason, such as someone decides they are no longer able to perform the duty of whatever position they have. So I did not write this up as a full thing because Skip has Article 4 already. So I just wrote this up as a part to be added to that after discussion.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I just had a couple nits. The second section of the new section, the second sentence of the new section 11, we talk the body shall be sworn in. I was thinking either instead of the body referencing members or members of that body, it's the body isn't what's being sworn.
Yeah, that sworn in was kind of tough, and that was actually added as a amendment to the bylaw from the last bylaw committee. So the sworn in was the sole change to that, I think. Yeah, so they added the word sworn in. So it was all boards, committees, and commissions must be appointed, meet, organize, and elect officers, and they added sworn in.
Yeah.
So
Which
might be
really
able to
sworn in is the only piece that body really kind of feels funky. It's like, body or members works with everything else, but
Yeah, one could reasonably interpret that to mean members individually sworn in.
Yeah.
But, and there's probably, in practice, there's probably no confusion.
yeah, I don't think anybody's gonna get it wrong.
Writing it that way, but yes, you can look at it and say, well, the body doesn't get sworn in.
So we could say the members of the body shall be sworn in, and the body shall meet, organize, and elect officers within 30 days of the date of that appointment.
Sure.
Yeah, that would work perfectly well.
And the only other thing on the new section 12, for non-elected, for appointed multi-member bodies, is June 30th the expiration date for is there anything that's not on a June 30th cycle?
I wasn't sure, so I went back and forth whether or not we should include June 30th or just leave it as their annual term expiration date. I went back and forth probably 4 or 5 different times on that.
Yeah, I think if there
I
isn't
know-
anything, I think June 30th might be an easier, way to describe it, but yeah, I just want to leave for the possible
Yeah.
outlier.
Like election workers are not technically a multi-member body. They are still sworn in. They're generally sworn in around the same time, even though that's not quite what state law says. So I don't know if there are other appointed boards that have other dates.
So does that position, election workers, who appoints the election workers?
And it's still the select board, but it doesn't fall under the rest of the multi-member body things.
Right. There's no governing board that makes any kind of decisions or anything. You just function as election workers under the direction of somebody.
Yeah,
Yeah, the election workers are not a multi-member body.
no, but it does show up on the boards and committees website, but otherwise,
Yes. Yeah.
unfortunately, the board and committee list on the website does not list the dates, so you have to go into each one of them individually to look at them. I suppose there could be other ones that, more ad hoc committees that have separate dates, like this one.
This committee was appointed to serve through the October 2023 town meeting.
Yeah,
So that's our expiration date.
Yeah.
Of course, this committee ceases to exist after the October town meeting.
Yeah.
So it's not a question of, well, we got new members, appointed or reappointed. Generally speaking, it has been at least recent practice of the select board to appoint most multiple member bodies with appointments expiring on June 30th at the end of the fiscal year. But yeah, unless we want the bylaw to require multiple member bodies to be appointed on a fiscal year basis, it's best to leave it abstract.
yeah,
And that's why I think the language that you proposed here is entirely appropriate. That if in their infinite wisdom, the select board appoints committees for their terms to run from January 1st to December 31st.
Yeah.
And but as far as I know, there's nothing to preclude that. It's more their practice of appointing multiple member bodies, usually in a term that extends through one entire fiscal year.
okay, so are we good with that one change?
Yeah.
Skip, are you good to incorporate that, or do you want me to send that to you?
No, I'm all set. I will keep that and add that to my stuff on that, on what I'm putting together for that for Dave or for us.
Okay,
Yep, so. And let's see, the last thing I had on my list under this agenda item was Article 12. Remembering that Brian said he had some comments on that. It's not last amendment. I put this all in place. Okay.
Hey, I have a question for you guys. Has anybody sat and listened to a meeting on Skype with the owl? Because I can't hear most of what you're saying. It's not picking it up.
is it on the right microphone?
Yeah. The owl is supposedly,
There's a dialogue.
it was.
I don't know, Dave, if it's like, if it's keying in when it's picking up movement of your face, because when you're facing forward, I'm not picking anything up, but as soon as you turned and looked at the owl, you kind of came through loud and clear. Just an observation. Nobody else is watching, so to speak, but
Yeah, maybe if my mouth is not pointed at the owl, it's not picking me up so well.
you're booming through now when you turn your head towards it. Just for your information.
That's good to know. I have listened to some other meetings that were recorded by the owl, and it varies in terms of how well it picks up voices. Sometimes I have to put my headphones on and turn the volume up, and then somebody speaks more loudly and my head hurts. Okay, so Article 12, Brian.
All right, so on the first page, so
Is this on the published version?
yeah, yes, yeah, I don't think there were, I don't think we made any edits to it in the last meeting, so I think the published version should be the same as what they originally sent out. For section 4, disposal of polluted material, just didn't know if we needed, or if these are commonly understood, or there's state laws or anything that would apply, but if we needed definitions for things like filthy water or unclean matter, or if kind of a common sense understanding was good enough to define either of those.
When you're using subjective words, it doesn't mean much.
Yeah, well, and that's what I was worried about. It's like, so does this really have any teeth if nobody can really define what filthy water or anything else might mean? It's, yeah,
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but it's probably, I'm sure that's something that's very, very old. And it's worth thinking about whether those terms are sufficiently clear to be understood, or whether they need more definition.
and I mean, to the extent that we're talking about depositing anything onto a street or public way, I wonder if we need to say anything other than, you know, no person shall just, well, to go back to the section title, no person shall dispose of any material, and maybe we could even remove polluted from the title, or the header. No person shall dispose of any material into or upon any street or public way. You know, kind of gets to, you know, quasi littering, which becomes section 5.
Yes.
Then you get into rainwater.
But the person isn't putting the rainwater.
No, but they're conducting.
It's true.
They are causing the rain by the arrangement of stuff on our property. They are causing rainwater to be empty onto the public street. So anybody with a driveway above street level,
Yeah.
has that. So
Yeah, I might wonder whether that's even has enough meaning to be a part of the bylaw.
Right. Be enforceable at all.
That's another one that I might look at other town bylaws to see if they have anything comparable.
The next one on section 7, the damage to lights and signals. It seems like, I mean, it might be a basic understanding, but it seems like anything that would fall under this section would just be blatantly illegal otherwise, and just be vandalism. So I didn't know if this section was really necessary to retain.
damage or break, probably extinguish or remove might be. I'm assuming this is something like you may not go out and turn the light bulb.
Right, it dates back to somebody, you know, taking the lamp down off the lamppost, or But it's, yeah, I don't think anybody's climbing a street light to pull out the LED.
You never know.
I mean, if they do that, I suppose they're probably trespassing at least. But it seems like an otherwise illegal act.
So basically, I could see that when someone puts out a construction barrel with a flashing light on it, and it's outside your bedroom window, and it's annoying you, you cannot go outside and turn it off.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it is that big.
That construction barrel with a light on it, you can't take it away from the road.
Yeah.
Among other things, that's what this says.
A question on 8A, Director of Public Works or there being the other officer having charge of ways for the purpose of removing or plowing snow or removing ice. May remove or possibly remove to something being in place and this can tow away any vehicle interfering with such work. So do we really need this authority here? It seems like this would really only ever be invoked in the case of some sort of otherwise declared snow emergency or, some other declaration that, if you can ordinarily park on the road, now you can't because some other, snow emergency or something else has been declared. Seems like anytime that there's plowable snow or treatable ice, the director of the DPW can have your car towed, which I don't know if that's ever done in practice, or if that's really even an authority that exists outside of some sort of snow emergency.
I would kind of tend to leave that in there because it allows them to take care of an issue should it become necessary without involving all kinds of other stuff, such as the police coming and that kind of thing. It's just, you know what? We've asked you to move your car 27 times. You left it here. It's gone.
Yeah.
I think I remember seeing a provision in state law authorizing the town to do something like this.
So I had a bunch of notes where we had penalties called out that didn't seem to be in compliance with the limit imposed in section 18, but I saw in your penalties note that we're probably going to get to a point where we're proposing eliminating that provision of section 18 anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know, in section 16, we reference chapter 140, section 54 of MGL, and I didn't see anything in 140, section 54, actually on this topic.
Which section was that?
Section 16 of the bylaw.
Section 16054 is junk dealers. Oh, yeah, well, yeah, 14054 is junk dealers.
Yep.
Yeah, but is it specific to, so these rules? So this is talking about the purchase of gold, silver, and platinum. That's what I didn't see in the section. So yeah, I agree. It speaks to junk dealers, but
Yeah, it speaks to junk dealers, and included in junk dealers are old metals. So we seem to have made some detailed regulations specifically for gold, silver, and platinum under the general heading of junk dealers. Our rules only apply to gold, silver, and platinum, which I would say will be covered by the old metals in section 54.
Yeah, I think it fits.
I remember, I spent some time scratching my head about this.
yeah, is that an understood definition of old metals? That was a term I wasn't familiar with. You can see precious metals.
I'd say old metals being like secondhand or,
Right, old metals could include iron, steel, aluminum, anything.
I guess as long as it would include something that would at least include gold, silver, and platinum.
I'd say if anything, so if you are licensed under this section and the things that you purchase are gold, silver, or platinum, then these additional things apply to it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that works, yeah. Section 16. Subsection D, it references all licenses granted under this article shall designate the place where a person licensed shall carry on their business. Just wondering, since this article is so broad and it comes to so many different things, should we reference this section 16 or something more specific than the article writ large? And then have the same comment on.
Yeah, that probably
section
should be
F.
section.
That definitely.
So,
Yeah,
So
G,
section-
G says this section, D and F say this article.
Sections, the second paragraph of section 16 refers to this article.
Yeah. Okay, so there are three places we should change article to section.
Yeah, and even G, it starts by any violation of this section
Oh,
may
yeah.
result in the revocation of license issued under this article.
Yes.
I think that's second one, or that can even be issued here under or something along those lines, but.
So it probably should be of the license as well.
Yes.
So in section 19, in the middle of the first paragraph, we reference chapter 101 of the general laws twice. But then that second reference is immediately followed. So it's talking about exemptions, or to any person exempted by any other general law. So it seems like if we're exempting any person exempted by general laws, we probably, or at least I would assume we probably don't need to specifically call out section 101 twice.
Well, chapter 101
No, chapter, yeah.
refers to transient vendors, hawkers, and peddlers. So chapter 101 is
The most.
kind of, broadly speaking, this section of the bylaw seems to be closely related to chapter 1 of the general laws.
Yeah.
Probably
I think it's a
why
useful
chapter
reference,
101 I mentioned. And but sort of as a catch-all. As a catch-all, if they need to reference, just in case there's any other general law that has a similar exemption. But yeah, I don't think I see a problem with that.
Sure. And then that first paragraph ends So. It's one giant sentence. I guess we'll start with, nor shall this bylaw section be construed to prevent persons having established customers to whom they make periodic deliveries from calling upon such customers or from making calls upon prospective customers to solicit an order for future periodic delivery. So if I'm taking this literally, what that's telling me is if I have at least one customer in town, I can cold call every other person in town. And I don't know if that's the intent. Because if you have at least one customer that you're calling on, then you can also make calls on any prospective customers to solicit future deliveries.
Yeah, that one is kind of weird.
Going back when this is adopted, I wonder who these were put in for, or who had some of this hieroglyphic language put in.
Yeah,
That was literally before my time. 4 months before I was born.
yeah. I'm going to say that deserves it. I don't know how to answer that or quite how to think about that. But I will look at chapter 101 for any clues about that. See what other towns I've got at least a couple dozen town bylaws that I've been referring to. That's worth trying to see what that really means, what it literally says.
Yeah. Otherwise, you might have just given some people a loophole.
And you get yourself a little toehold in there, and now the whole town is open to you.
Yeah, exactly. So staying in that same section, but the following page, so page 6 of the PDF, upon receipt of the application, the chief of police shall investigate the applicant's reputation as to morals and integrity. I just didn't know if morals and integrity had any baseline or understood meaning or basis for granting or rejecting.
People that have morals and integrity don't use dirty water.
Yeah, or is this the catch-all to say that the chief of police can grant licenses to whomever he or she pleases?
That language sounds like it came from long ago. I might wonder the extent to which that language has any validity these days.
Yeah, leave it in there until somebody makes us take it out.
Somebody challenge.
Yeah, that's one of those things that
Comes from section 22 of 101.
Maybe it has a sufficiently well-defined meaning then.
Shall state to the best of his knowledge or belief, the applicant therein named is of good repute as to morals and integrity.
Hey, if it's in state law, we can repeat it here.
Yeah. But yeah, there's section 32 might be a place to look for the others, the prospective customers. But it kind of seems to be related to that.
All right, well, that's worth digging into a little bit deeper.
Section 20B. It ends in any public park or playground in the town of Grafton and within 100 feet thereof. Just wonder if that and should be an or. So park or playground in the town of Grafton or within 100 feet thereof.
If I were writing it, I probably would have written or.
Next one, a little bit further down that same page, section 21, order, and so this is the knitable knits, whatever even at least all of the other sections where we have kind of subsections defined, they're lettered, 20A, 20B, 20C. 21, we use numbers.
Yeah, section 21, I'm waiting for the Accessibility Advisory Commission to come back. If it were up to me, I would be rewriting practically that whole thing
Or eliminating.
for a lot of reasons. And to me, it's just begging to be rewritten. But I'm waiting to see. This dates from before the Americans with Disabilities Act. So with the ADA and the all the state law and regulations that have come along with that, or after that, this section of the bylaw may no longer even be necessary. I'm waiting to hear back from the Accessibility Advisory Commission. They're expert, they promised me their expert is going to advise us on what we should do with this. So I haven't touched it. I've got a lot of comments on it, but I haven't touched it. Sure. Other than, well, I guess I did maybe. I did change the language in one place there.
Section
Yeah,
20.
we should not debate on it or anything until they pass judgment.
Yeah, I've not wanted to do anything with it as much as I'm tempted to do so.
Yeah. Section 25A, the second paragraph references Board of Selectmen.
Ah.
That's a typographical one that can be fixed, but that change was authorized. So,
Yes, that should have already been done.
yeah,
Whoever edited that missed this one.
yeah.
I think I caught at least one reference to Board of Selectmen and somewhere else. I didn't see that one.
Section 28A. So
The new fingerprint bylaw. So what section was that?
So 28A, in the definitions, within the definition of single-use carryout bag, it references reusable grocery bag, which I believe should just be a reference down to the reusable carryout bag that's defined next.
Yeah.
Because if that change isn't made, reusable carryout bag is defined, but that term actually isn't used anywhere.
That's good.
And then 28B has a reference to reusable shopping bags and the same thing, that could be reusable carryout bags to use the same definition.
And also reasonable checkout bags in the same sentence.
Yeah.
Funny that this, by and large, this language was copied from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And whoever wrote that something else and copied it really wasn't scrutinizing it carefully.
Yeah. Like reusable being hyphenated in one place, but not all the others.
And I think
And that is the kind of thing that we trying to look here for is consistency of terminology.
Yeah.
And something I remember from my days, writing standards and specifications is you want to make sure that you've defined every term and that that every term that you've defined is referenced, otherwise why is the definition there? And that you use the same terms wherever you need, wherever, don't use two different terms to mean the same thing.
yeah, that was all I had. The only other thing that's, we briefly touched on it last time, but it still just feels weird to me that the Board of Health has jurisdiction over 28 and 29, but it seems like that's the most common practice.
Yes, that is common. I had, as I was working on these particular revisions, I had looked at a number of other towns for styrofoam and plastic bags. And there's some variation, but most of them put that under the Board of Health.
I mean, I suppose it's better than the police wasting their time on it, but.
Yes. Okay, well, thanks for that, and I will make those updates and we'll bring this back to our next meeting for further review. And then the last item I had on my list of things to discuss is penalties.
Did you get the draft that I sent the alarm bylaw? It was,
I don't remember getting the alarm bylaw.
oh, it's because it's still sitting in my drafts.
Uh,
All right, I'll hit send on this and we can chat about it at the next meeting. But that, yeah, that should be good to go. Sorry about that, guys.
what do we have? Yeah. So we can kind of putting this off. Penalties. All along we've acknowledged that we need to review the penalties and nail some things down, make some updates. So I threw together, I just went through and jotted down what I noticed as things that we might want to discuss doing as with respect to penalties. And I don't assume this is an exhaustive list or a complete list or anything like that. That's a starting point for our discussion. And just kind of to go through from the top, just speaking about general provisions of penalties, we've observed that Article 1, Section 6 has penalties for everything. And Article 12, Section 18 has penalties for everything in Article 12. In both cases, those are, unless something else is said. Yeah. So Article 12, Section 18 is completely redundant. Because Article 1, Section 6 basically does the same thing, but for all articles, not just Article 12. So, yeah, my proposal is simply to delete Article 12, Section 18. What's up in the air in my mind is whether somewhere in Article 1, Section 6, somewhere in Article 1, Section 6, we may want to put some sort of general purpose language about non-criminal disposition. I haven't really thought much about exactly what I would put there. I will note that some towns in a corresponding position in their bylaws basically say, we're adopting non-criminal disposition, Chapter 40, Section 21D, and here are all the bylaws where we're going to use it, and here are the penalties. So it basically spells out all in one place, everywhere that non-criminal disposition is used. I think my preference is not to do that in our bylaws, but rather as we currently have it, each bylaw where we use non-criminal, where we are authorizing non-criminal disposition, we say so there. There may be some general statements that we can make in Article 1, Section 6 about non-criminal disposition. I haven't tried to think about what those might be, but if you guys think that that's worth considering, then I'll see what I can come up with as something that might be appropriate there. I mentioned here in Article 1, Section 6D, which is the whole Section 6D applies to smoking regulations and authorizes the Board of Health to enforce those using non-criminal disposition. But there's two things that leads me to. One is the Board of Health has some other regulations which claim non-criminal disposition, although technically they're not authorized by bylaw to do so. So it's either Section 6D or more generally Section 6 somewhere, and maybe in connection with what I was just talking about, where the bylaws could authorize any town board in regulations adopted by that board to utilize non-criminal disposition for violations, with the details to be specified in those regulations. That's something that probably does need, to make the Board of Health regs that's currently quote on a non-criminal disposition, to make those legal, the bylaw probably needs to authorize that. And the statute itself authorizes the use of non-criminal disposition, not only to enforce bylaws, but also to enforce regulations. So we can add some language somewhere here in Article 1, Section 6, or one of the subsections thereof, to authorize the use of non-criminal disposition for regulations.
Is the Board of Health an outlier in that sense? Is there any other body that you're aware of that would have policies that it would try to enforce through non-criminal disposition that aren't bylaws that we're going to get into separately?
There's nothing that any other board currently has that I know of. There are a number of boards that issue regulations or are authorized to issue regulations, even if they haven't actually done so. And at least in some cases, those regulations could conceivably benefit from non-criminal disposition. But the only instances that I know of where we actually have regulations that refer to non-criminal disposition are the Board of Health. But since the statute allows any regulation promulgated by any town board to use non-criminal disposition if they so choose, sort of a blanket authorization to that effect would be reasonable, I think, in the bylaws.
But if the authorization is already coming from 21D, do we need to go into more detail here about, regulations that don't have homes in the bylaws themselves?
If I remember right, double check here. I think 21D requires us right. We must authorize that by bylaw. By bylaw, we can provide for non-criminal disposition for violation of any ordinance or bylaw or any rule or regulation of any municipal office or board or department. But the bylaw has to authorize that.
And I suppose we could either do that generally or specifically call out the Board of Health and subsequently any other board that we want to give the authority to.
Yeah, and we can make the bylaw say whatever we think is appropriate. But to avoid, I suppose it could cut both ways. If by bylaw we authorize any town board to utilize non-criminal disposition in any regulation, it saves us the trouble of amending the bylaw if, say, the select board has a regulation that adopts a regulation that they want to use 21D on, and we wouldn't have to change the bylaw. But on the other hand, a sufficiently broad authorization might possibly encounter resistance.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the inverse. Like, is there any instance that we can think of where we would not want to offer the availability of non-criminal disposition? And I suppose that's where what we think, might not matter if there's a broader opposition to that kind of blanket application at town meeting.
Yeah, my inclination would be to make it a pretty broad authorization. But ultimately, if as we approach town meeting time, hopefully we'll get some more public engagement on this prior to town meeting floor. If nothing else, there will be hearings before the finance committee. So we'll at least have some outside looking at it, some outside point of view that might suggest that we should be more specific. I will note that in recent years, a number of bylaws have passed town meeting, including non-criminal disposition and not a word has been said.
Yeah.
Unlike going back many years when there was considerable resistance to it at town meeting.
I was going to go there, Dave, but you already took my thunder there.
Yeah, and this committee 20 years ago chose not to put it forward.
Yes. Yes, no, and Skip, you and I both remember quite a bit of resistance to non-criminal disposition back in the day, but things do seem to have changed.
Yeah, people just didn't kind of understand it. You know, at the time this first came up, I was on the Board of Health and just didn't want to have anything to do with it because it was going backwards in my impression, and it probably still would be. Because anything that they had was, you know, you just signed a complaint and go to criminal court. It wasn't any fooling around with anybody, and you didn't want to fool around with somebody with the things that we had to regulate anyways.
Yeah. And nowadays, at least, I mean, and it's kind of always been true when you really think about it, that just adopting it in the town bylaws doesn't really have any effect, because while the bylaws can authorize the use of non-criminal disposition, the people who are charged with enforcing it and issuing the citations, they've got to jump through a few hoops. They've got to get forms approved by the district court. They've got to have procedures. They've got to keep records. And, you know, they're just, you know, putting it in the bylaws, you're not going to find town officials going willy-nilly all over the place looking for violations.
No, it's the same thing that, you know, when you're talking about fines and stuff, right? We're going to change the fines for, you know, people putting house numbers on. When's the last time anybody went to the town clerk and said, hey, you got to send a letter off to the guy telling him he doesn't have a house number on his house?
Probably never happened.
Yeah. And get more than $5 from them.
Yeah, I mean, one reason that things don't get enforced is because it's such a big headache to have to, you know, do all the legal paperwork to take them to court. The advantage of non-criminal disposition, such as it is it may make enforcement more effective because there's a lower barrier to you know, even attempting enforcement. But even there, they're going to, you know, the people charged with doing the enforcement, it's still going to take some of their time. It just won't be as burdensome as going to court, but it's still going to be an expenditure of effort. So they're not going to go off willy-nilly unless the case seems to merit enforcement.
Right, agreed.
In any case, so where are we at? Okay, so that's it as far as general provision. I'll take a closer look and see if I can come up with some language to propose in Article 1, Section 6. And I think we're all agreed that we can delete Article 12, Section 18. The next topic, I got to looking through things and I thought, on the inspector of wires and the inspector of gas pipeline, do we even need to have penalties in those bylaws? That's one of the things I looked in at least a dozen other towns. They don't even have a bylaw article for either one of these. Some of them have a bylaw article for one or the other that does nothing more than say, we're going to have an inspector of wires. We're going to have an inspector of gas piping. That's all they say in their bylaws. And it's not clear that we need penalties in our bylaws because the state regulations already have penalties for unlicensed wiring and unlicensed gas fitting.
Yeah, and even absent those, we'd still have Article 1, Section 6, you know, with the $50 a day catch-all. So,
Yeah.
So no, I was going to make the same proposal that we could just strip them completely.
Yeah. So
I'll raise my ditto hand.
excellent. So we're gonna take Articles 11 and Article 14 and delete those penalties.
Do you want me to? I can make that edit and send you the draft of those. Those are both mine.
Excellent. And then there was questions about updating the dollar amount of penalties. We just touched on house numbering. It's currently $5 a day. It's a penalty that we think may not even ever be used. If we do use it, it's $5 a day, even worth going after anybody for it. It's more of a, well, yeah, you should do it, and theoretically, there's a penalty for it. Related to the dollar amount of penalties, though, is non-criminal disposition. And I think I've heard from, I think, more than one source that when it comes to non-criminal disposition, you might prefer smaller dollar amounts because it's more likely that they'll pay. $100, you issue somebody a citation for $300 on non-criminal disposition. That's kind of motivation for them to take it to court and challenge it. If it's $30, they'll probably just pay. So thinking about updating dollar amounts, there is that consideration if we're going to tie that to a non-criminal disposition. Unregistered motor vehicles is the other one that I noticed that seems to have a pretty low penalty, $20 a day. Maybe that's good enough, maybe, because I included that also in my list of where we might consider non-criminal disposition. And maybe $20 a day under non-criminal disposition is okay for unregistered motor vehicle. It's another one I don't know, however much we actually enforce that. And I didn't have any others that stuck out at me as dollar amounts that needed to be changed.
I'd say since it's a per day thing, it's probably okay. 20.
Yeah, and to me, it almost feels like those two should almost be inverted. You think of, if you're in violation of the house numbering bylaw and you get notice that you're out of compliance, you got to run down to Koopman's, buy a number and slap it on your house. You should be able to do that the same day, right? Having to register or dispose of an unregistered motor vehicle, that can take some time.
Yeah.
So you could have, at a penalty that racks up by the day, you could rack up some serious dollars on, at $20 a day. Whereas I wouldn't necessarily expect it to take somebody a month to go out and slap a number on their house.
There is a 10-day grace period after the date of receipt of written notice for the $20 a day for vehicles. So.
Right. And I would also contest that you can call somebody up and donate an unregistered motor vehicle pretty quick.
Yeah.
That's geared towards having somebody have a bunch of wrecks in their yard.
Yeah, an occasional unregistered motor vehicle, if anybody even notices it, I mean, no one's, the town's unlikely to come after you unless somebody's noticed it and it starts sticking out like a sore thumb. And when you have a penalty together with a grace period, like you're issued a warning, you have some time to cure that, and then we start hitting you with penalties. That's also kind of a consideration that I've seen that a number of other places in the bylaws currently with penalties. I wrote that into the scenic roads, and it's fairly common practice in various ways too. And I think that it's also true with the plastic bags and the styrofoam both. You get a warning, and if you don't respond quickly enough, then we start hitting you with fines. So yeah, unless anybody has anything else, I'm comfortable with leaving these dollar amounts alone.
Yeah.
And then I listed a number of places where I thought maybe non-criminal disposition would be appropriate. And without getting into a lot of detail, I think just generally across the board, I'm thinking in terms of a warning, a grace period, and then fines, probably escalating for repeated fines for repeated offenses, something like that. I didn't try to think of any specific dollar amounts here. But just going through the ones that I listed, feel free to disagree or add to this list. I'm towing of obstructing vehicles, and does get back to the question of the extent to which we're authorized to do that. But something we are. That seems like something that if you, what would I say?
And I wonder, would we even need to authorize it for that? Because it's not so much a penalty as we're telling you we're going to tow your car and it's going to be at your expense. So it's, I mean, it definitely has the effect of a penalty. But to the extent that they might be paying the towing company or, unless it's the DPW that's doing the towing.
The funny thing is, we're authorized to tow obstructing vehicles, but then in that section 8A of 12, or section 8B, has penalties for violation of section 8A.
So there is a fine in addition to the towing costs.
Yeah. Yeah, so if we, and so given the, and I guess the repeat offenses mean you left your vehicle out on the road, we towed it away. Next time it snowed, your vehicle's back out on the road again, you had to tow it away again. We're gonna be hitting you with increased penalties. So we've got an escalating schedule of penalties already, 25. First one, 50, second one, $100 burden thereafter. If we simply add, allow those penalties to be assessed by non-criminal disposition, with a little bit of, with the necessary detail added there, that probably enabling non-criminal disposition may make those penalties more effective. Although if your car keeps getting towed, that in itself is probably a kind of a motivation not to do it again. But the bylaw here anticipates repeated offenses for that. So
Do we know if? Sure, it does happen during snow emergencies. I wonder how often this is even done at the order of the DPW as opposed to.
yeah. I don't know how often we actually do this, if we've ever had to do it, but it's there. So that was one place that looked to me like a plausible candidate for non-criminal disposition. 8C, deposited snow on town roadways. That's another one. That just gives a flat $150 for every offense. As an alternative to that, it could be an escalating schedule of non-criminal disposition penalties as well. That's something that I don't know how often our DPW encounters this, but if somebody is, and if like when I'm clearing snow off my driveway, sometimes the snow blower blows a little bit of snow out onto the road. No one's going to come after you for that. But if you're plowing a 100-foot driveway and you're pushing all that snow out onto the road and leaving it there, that's what this is aimed at. And a non-criminal disposition is probably going to be more effective in enforcing this. The next one on my list was, again, Article 12, Section 11B. Animals or vehicles in or upon public areas. And we currently have a fine not to exceed $50 per offense for driving your vehicle into the park, or the common, or the recreation areas where you're not authorized to do so. Animals, likewise. Another struck me that that's a plausible candidate for non-criminal disposition. Not sure what I propose for fines, but. Article 19, solicitor canvassing. Another one where the
Oh, sorry, Dave, on that particular item, I think that violation of any of the town's bylaws are kind of non-criminal in their own way. If you get a parking ticket, it's a town bylaw. I don't think that that's like you can't get. I don't think that like the town stuff. I don't think is criminal.
I'm not quite sure if it's technically considered criminal, although in a sense I think it is, because generally speaking, the violation of the town bylaw is punishable, or it's enforced by way of a criminal complaint taken to district court. Unless otherwise specified. But
So if you give somebody a parking ticket and they don't pay it, not much is going to happen.
Yeah, I think a parking ticket. Not sure, I don't remember just where that comes from, but it's more like a traffic ticket. And parking tickets are non-criminal in nature. But more generally, I don't recall exactly where, I'd have to look this up again, but more generally, the violation of town bylaws is enforceable by criminal complaint in district court.
Yeah, that's what's outlined in section 6 of Article 1.
So where were we? Soliciting or canvassing, that seemed like a good subject for non-criminal disposition. Alcoholic beverages is Article 12, Section 20. That, in a sense, is comparable to the public consumption of marijuana, which is currently a non-criminal disposition. The alcoholic beverages bylaw looks like a plausible candidate for non-criminal disposition. First removal is another one. That
Is 20 even necessary? Or is that covered by state laws?
In terms of the penalty or the whole section?
Basically, public consumption of alcohol.
Yeah.
Is that not covered by state law already?
that's a good question.
Something to look into.
Make a note of that here.
And yeah, especially with section 20C. Commenting on, I'm sure we don't need the bylaw to authorize the arrest without a warrant of somebody violating the bylaw. So the basis of the arrest lies somewhere other than this bylaw.
And it seems like in the last 42 years, some state law would have covered this already.
Yes, that's a good question. We've been willing to consider that bylaws or certain bylaws may no longer be necessary. That's good. I thought about that. So, and my next suggestion for non-criminal was earth removal. My next question after that, and again, I hadn't taken my thinking to the level of proposing any specific penalties, more as the general concept. That seemed like illegal earth removal ought to be punishable by some means of it. If it's really egregious, it'll be worth the town's expense to take it to court.
Yeah.
Short of that, 21D can be, I don't know how often we actually see violations of this bylaw. We may never see them. What do you do?
This is kind of getting back to my question about, I wonder who this was put in for. At a time, at a time when people were actually doing earth removal, like where the town hall sits today, and a variety of other places, as opposed to developments. We just don't have that happen here so much anymore. And it may have been just targeted at not letting people dig up stuff that they used to dig up when they were doing developments.
Yeah, I think this seems to be targeted at like corporate. And can you use non-criminal disposition for a corporation or other business as opposed to a person. Don't know.
And interestingly enough, earth removal is specifically authorized by state law. Forget which, section 17 of some chapter that specifically authorizes towns to make bylaws about this specific topic of earth removal.
Yeah. So that's the only thought on that one is whether non-criminal disposition would even apply here, so.
Yeah. We can have a note about this somewhere. Yes,
I remember asking you this one.
it's chapter 40, section 17 about earth removal. And interestingly enough, chapter 40, 17 spells out specific penalties where our bylaw says up to. The statute does not include up to, so the statute says your penalties will be exactly $50 for the first offense after a warning, 100 second offense, 200 subsequent offenses.
What was that? 4017?
Chapter 40, section 17.
I have that about public ways.
Or is it chapter 41? No, it's not 41. And do I have? Yes, it's section 21, paragraph 17. Yes,
Okay, yeah.
chapter 40, section 21, paragraph 17. And it gives jurisdiction to the Superior Court to compel compliance. So good question is, can we use non-criminal disposition? I think the answer is we can.
I'd still love to know.
Section 21 specifically authorizes 21D. Says it can be done by 21D. Well, first paragraph of 21.
Yes.
I'd love to know the last time we issued a earth removal permit.
All right. So yes, we could use 21D for removal if we wanted to. Or so it would appear. Town council review this night. Well, one thing we'll ask town council is wherever we're proposing using 21D, confirm for us that they actually can.
Yeah.
But I'll assume we can until it's proven otherwise.
Okay.
The next one I pulled out here was unregistered motor vehicles, which we just got a little bit earlier.
Yeah. Good with that.
House numbering,
Yeah, already.
Silver Lake and Lake Ripple, we have a penalty there, that enforcement there, which probably, I don't know how often we ever have to enforce the bylaw there, but non-criminal disposition would seem to be a more practical way to enforce violations if we do find any.
Yeah.
And the last one I had on my list of possible 21Ds is the alarm bylaw.
Yeah, and it'll be in the draft of the alarm bylaw that I just sent out.
Excellent. So that was my list for 21D. Any other places that you any of you think 21D would be usable or useful?
Have not seen any others yet.
The only other place that I know of that's been suggested was the zoning bylaw, but that's not for us.
And this list was intended for additional, above and beyond places where it's already called out.
So
right?
I'm thinking everywhere where we already referenced
Yeah.
21D, some of those references don't actually work.
Yeah,
But I think, at least all the ones that I've looked at, I think I've amended those proposed amendments so that they meet the requirements of 21D. It just so happens I stumbled across an Attorney General's approval letter for some other town where the Attorney General said this whatever bylaw it was the town was proposing to use 21D. The Attorney General said it doesn't work because you didn't specify a specific value. You said up to. You can't say up to and have that work with 21D. And all the ones that I've spotted on that of that type, I've taken care of. I've put in specific penalties.
Amounts.
What was that, Skip?
Yes, but yeah, they don't like anything that's arbitrary.
Yeah. Yeah, for 21D, you need to have a specific penalty and you need to have a specific person authorized to enforce. And in at least one case in our bylaws, we didn't even have a specific person authorized to enforce. We've corrected those. And the last thing I had under penalties, as previously noted in our discussion, Article 12, Section 21 on handicap parking, we're waiting for review and advice on that. And I noticed in Article 16, something that may need town council's advice on, because Article 16, enforcement, the enforcement that's spelled out by Chapter 140, Section 173A, is by that law, the statute's definition, a non-criminal disposition. So it's not clear to me that citing 21D in that same place is useful. It seems to conflict. One of the conflict there I see is that 173A has a maximum penalty or has a penalty of $500. And 21D does not allow penalties more than 300. So there's what looks like a conflict there. I would probably say refer this to town council as part of her review to see whether it's appropriate to cite 21D in this particular place, since the statute basically defines it already as non-criminal. Don't know that 21D adds anything to that. But that's beyond my knowledge to know how to resolve that possible conflict. And other than that, I didn't have any other thoughts on penalties. But as I said, my thinking is not necessarily complete or accurate. But to the extent that we're kind of in agreement with this, I'll follow up on the parts that I have. Article 1 primarily, Article 12. And Brian, you said you already incorporated 21D into the draft of the Arlon bylaw.
into 30, yeah.
You'll take care of it.
Let me know if I screwed it up.
Pardon?
Let me know if I screwed it up. But yeah, and I'll take care of rewrites for
All right.
11 and 14.
Okay. We're good with that. We can always have second thoughts or further thoughts, but we've got some homework to do for next time. And if there's nothing else, anybody else have anything on bylaw updates? The last agenda item I have is meeting minutes from previous meeting.
I'm going to accept the meeting minutes as presented. Second.
Give Brian a dime for his great job.
There you go. All right, moved and seconded that the minutes be approved as drafted. Since we now have Skip on remote, I'm going to have to call roll call vote, starting with Mr. Curry,
Aye.
Mr. Langevin,
Aye.
Mr. Marr,
Aye.
And Mr. Robbins votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. And with that, motion to adjourn might be in order.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we be adjourned.
I'd like to discuss that motion. Enjoy your 4th of July holiday, everyone.
You don't believe discussion's allowed?
And I have to take a roll call vote. Skip,
Aye.
Ryan,
Aye.
Greg,
Aye.
Dave votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. We are adjourned.